This is Twit.
Well, the European Parliament passed a major set of telecom reforms, including strong net neutrality rules and laws to kill roaming fees within Europe. Maggie Reardon is a reporter for CNET who covers this topic, and we welcome you, Maggie.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, are you impressed with Europe's new net neutrality law?
Yeah, I mean, given the fact that what we had here in the U.S. was completely struck down and stripped just a couple of months ago, yeah, I mean, this is a big deal. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out because, as many people are aware, the internet really doesn't seem to know borders. So it'll be interesting to see how this gets implemented in Europe when we don't have the same kinds of rules functioning here in the U.S.
So first of all, very quickly, in addition to net neutrality, they also covered other topics of importance to smartphone users, including the kind of banishment of roaming fees within Europe. So if you get a smartphone or a cell phone anywhere in Europe, then you can't be charged roaming fees elsewhere in Europe if you travel around in Europe. So that'll be a kind of a nice thing for users and not a nice thing for carriers who are kind of addicted to those roaming fees revenues. Now, I've been kind of following this and noticing that there's still a lot of confusion about the current state of net neutrality within the U.S. and this coverage of the European net neutrality law is kind of bringing it to the surface. For example, the Associated Press did a story on this and casually mentioned the status of the U.S. policy, and I'm going to quote that article. They wrote that European policy is now departing sharply with the route taken in the U.S. where a net neutrality law was struck down in January. Since then, Netflix has contracted with Comcast for preferential treatment of internet traffic bearing its film streams. Now, this seems to be, according to my understanding, flawed in three ways. First of all, it wasn't really a law that was struck down, was it? Wasn't it the FCC's own rules?
It's FCC regulation, which is not law. The FCC works at the behest of Congress, and under communications acts, they are given their power to be able to put in regulation. So the regulation was struck down. If there was a law, then everything would be hunky dory.
And the second thing was, it wasn't. My understanding was that it wasn't struck down, as everybody seems to be saying. Didn't they just say that you can't apply net neutrality to carriers because they're not public utilities? They're not like the phone system or something like that. Not that they're not like that, but you don't call them that. The FCC itself didn't classify them as such.
Yeah, I mean, basically, for all intents and purposes, it was struck down. I mean, it basically lost, the FCC, it was a legal technicality in terms of the way they formed their argument in supporting the regulation, but they are not able to enforce it because, they based it on legal principles that the court found were invalid. So they have to go back and actually that's what they're doing right now is they're going back and they're trying to rewrite regulation that hopefully will work within the parameters of the law that will, the most important thing that Chairman Tom Wheeler has said he wants to do is make sure that, this idea of blocking traffic, which means you won't be able to access something like a Netflix at all or a WhatsApp, that nobody can actually block any particular site or service. And also the anti-discrimination clause, which is you can't, necessarily prefer one over the other. You can't Comcast can't prefer its service over another provider's service because it competes with their own. And those are the two main principles. And that's what they've done in Europe. Now, I think, you also pointed out that the AP, they did get some other things wrong in that story because really the issue that's happening with Netflix and Comcast right now is not a net neutrality issue really at all. It has to do more with business arrangements and peering. And net neutrality has never tackled that issue at all. And I don't think that it will. And if you read statements that Chairman Wheeler has said, he's made that very clear that these are two separate issues. And I think, the real question on that issue is, will the FCC start to look into peering arrangements? And is that a place for government to intercede, or do we let the market decide?
Yeah, it's a great point. And my understanding is that since this FCC rule was struck down, in this interim period, and everybody knows they're going to come out with new rules, and there'll be a new set of rules for companies to play by. But in that interim period, there's this characterization of this situation as it's like a free-for-all, and companies are doing all kinds of different things to violate net neutrality. But essentially, I'm not aware of any single thing by any major company that is taking place because of what happened with the FCC's rules. Are you?
I'm not either. And, there have been very, very few instances ever where anybody has violated, so-called net neutrality. The same goes for, within Europe. I mean, it's really not been a problem for anybody. I think the issue is that everybody recognizes that the internet is changing and that we're seeing more concentrated power of the companies that actually control the infrastructure, and what will they do with that power? And I think that's a valid question to ask. I think it's something that we need to keep an eye on. And, I think that it behooves everyone to have, rules of the road that everybody follows and knows and recognizes. I think, unfortunately, we're seeing all this discussion of business relationships and peering, which is a really complicated topic to understand. In fact, I've spent the past several weeks trying to figure out what the heck is actually going on with these arrangements. And it's really difficult, and it's difficult to explain to readers in a very basic way so that people understand and their eyes don't totally glaze over when you're talking about it. But it's important, but these are business arrangements. And right now, we have to figure out whether or not there's so much power in the hands of a Comcast or an AT&T or a Verizon, whether or not we need government to do something about that, to look at these business arrangements and see if there's anything kind of funny going on. And the problem right now is those contracts are not made public. So the government hasn't even looked at them at all. But, so I think this is something to sort of keep an eye on and see what happens.
Well, it is a difficult and complicated issue, and difficult to explain clearly to a general audience or even a technical audience. And you've done a great job on CNET and a great job here today. And I thank you for coming on Tech News Today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, you can find Maggie at CNET.com, of course, and on Twitter at Maggie_Reardon.